Hello, friends. Good evening. Welcome to our weekly live stream, S.O.S, Sense on Sunday, or Stephen on Sunday, as you'd like. I try my best to do it at 7. So it's Stephen on Sunday at 7, talking sense, we hope. And, and also a welcome to those of you who are not watching this live, but maybe joining us a little bit later. So we start off today with the heading, as you can see here, guys. Culture as a crucible for good or evil, how personal discernment is essential to understanding the globalist plans of which we will all be partaking in one way or the other, either complying, contributing, funding, objecting, obstructing, or whatever the case may be. But I believe this is hugely important, guys, because we're having all these discussions at the moment about the importance of culture, especially with the phenomenon of uncontrolled mass immigration and the effect it's having on different countries. Now, last week we'll call it sort of, it wasn't part one of this particular video because I've changed quite a bit that's going in today. But last week we talked about the shame of Ireland and why they, meaning the diabolicals, if you like, are coming after the children and their reasoning for it. So today we'll merge that. There was 1 or 2 slides left, which we'll go through quickly here now, just to give people a flavor of that discussion. And then we will move into this discussion about culture and what it means to each of us and how we need to evaluate the good and the not so good parts of our culture with a view to future developments as to how we're going to try and ensure that the culture of the future for our children in particular is far more conducive to them leading, happy, healthy, holy lives, so to speak. Okay. So just first of all, then just a short, and I do mean a short recap on what we were covering last week, guys. And we were talking about the mythological Garden of Eden in certain respects, because it's important if we're to understand today's world, and particularly the problems of today's world, we need to have some context to put it in. And unfortunately, the only context that we have is human history. So, we keep looking back at previous periods of history, looking for that utopia. Was it when, the Neanderthals were free of any rules, laws, and regulations, and they could just roam around, hunting game and picking fruit and, whatever it was they did? Or was it back to the time of the Magna Carta? Or was it the 10 Commandments? Or was it Brehon law? And so on and so forth. Well, as we'll talk about a little bit today, this idea of going back. Hi there, Paul. Good to see you, buddy. I'll notice a few comments on the right as best I can, guys, but often they come up in such speed and succession that I miss a lot of them. But I will do my best to acknowledge all comments after the video, if not during it. So putting things in context, look, I'm sure there's none of us that would argue with the clear and self-evident fact that the world has many, many, many problems originating in human activity, human thoughts, human constructs, human plans, human ambitions. And I am arguing based on, let's see if I get it right the first time. Yes, up the top there, top right as I look at the screen. The original principle is this concept that actually mankind was designed to operate under this original principle. And it's because we fell from that principle. But you see, although scriptures and mythologies deal with this and talk about it in considerable convoluted detail, very few people have actually described what life would really be like. Hi guys, Mr. Gilchrist and Yvonne, good, nice to see you guys. Very few people have articulated what human society in particular would look like, all right? And that's excluding it from nature and the environment and the cosmos and all that. Human society is different because we have consciences And in many cases, we're not fully aware of what those consciences are supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to be functioning. I'm saying that they're supposed to be in alignment with this original principle. And if they were, almost all of the world's problems would not exist, because we would be returning to this concept of the Garden of Eden. And what do we have there? And very briefly, guys, we covered this last week, but very briefly, they're all triads, okay? So in the first place, you have God, Eve, and Adam. Eve is the one on the left in the blue, Adam's the one on the right, okay? You had deity, woman, and man in this order: spirit, mind, and body, right? The mind being the feminine, the body being the masculine, because that equates to sophos, which is wisdom, and logos, which is the word in action, okay? Concept, plan, and action. If you think about it, that's how everything gets done in our world. You have an idea, then you make a plan, and then you follow through with the action. Even making a cup of tea or building the Taj Mahal, it's the same principle for both. The Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. Again, we cover this in other details, but the tree of knowledge is symbolic of wisdom, which is the feminine. The tree of life is symbolic of action, which is the equivalence of the masculine, or Adam. And interestingly, the word Adam in Hebrew means red. Okay, and this comes into play a little bit later. Origin, feminine and masculine. Truth, wisdom, and activity. Eternal, internal, and external. You know this if you're a Buddhist. Source, alignment, and connection. Love, beauty, and creativity, which comes into our cultural discussion today. Electrons, neutrons, and protons. Why? Just to show you there's a scientific connection to all this as well. That's it on the left. That's the makeup of an atom there below the blue tree. And over on the right, there's the makeup of what we would call the atomic family. A male and female joined in union under, godly love, so to speak. And all of that equals the original principle. So feel free to freeze it, guys. Use it yourself if you wish. But there's more. There's about another 40 of these triads that extend all across all human activities. Science, nature, arts, even what's it called? Vexillology, which is the study of nations' flags, politics, and so on and so forth. It's fascinating. And it's all reflected in the properties of light. So we'll fly through these couple of slides just to bring it. And this was the last slide I finished on last week before the exit slides. And again, the reason why this original principle is so very important, it's because it aligns precisely with the properties of the visible light spectrum. Okay, deep blues at one end, deep reds at the other. Deep blues relate to 400 nanometers. It's the size of the wavelengths, and the deep reds are 700. And check this out, guys. University studies and all the rest of it tell us this is basically what most people can see. There may be exceptions to the rule, but this then gives a bit of sense to why these particular colors keep repeating in mythologies, scriptures, archetypes, dreams, even movies, where the directors would choose colors for the good guys and the bad guys without consciously knowing why they were doing it. There's something going on, guys. It's very, very important that we understand it. Okay, so right. So having then covered those, this would have been the very last slide last week before we went into the Misha Era Cultural Festival in Ireland, but we're covering that today in brief. And again, guys, feel free to freeze this, take a long, close look at it, see how much sense this all makes. But there's one cardinal truth here that is not reflected in most of the world's philosophies. Here, I'm pointing to the original principle, and I'm going to say something now categoric. Everything within and associated with the original principle is intrinsically good. You know, if you use the terms good and evil, they are good. There'll be some aspects maybe less perfect or less fulfilled than others, but it's all good. Evil, as a construct that is understood by a lot of people to be a counterbalance to good, is not, guys. It's not a counterbalance to good. It's an attack on good. Or to be more specific, it's an attack on this original principle. And unfortunately, the only agents that we're aware that are capable of actively instigating evil, even if you believe in aliens and devils and all that sort of stuff, it still comes through human agency. All right. So we're carrying a problem with us. most people don't understand what it is. To give it a singular word, it would be evil, or the satanic mindset, which then results in compound problems in human society, such as we have today: war, violence, greed, oppression and suppression of the feminine, and so on and so forth. But these are all traits of the original dark masculine, the what I call the satanic Cain mindset. After the fall, he murdered his younger brother, who was in the feminine position, and then went off and started human society as we know it. He started the first city, taxation systems, rules and regulations, basically everything we've inherited today that we call history or human society is really an outgrowth of the satanic Cain mindset. And understanding that and understanding how it's manifesting itself in our daily societies is the key to understanding how we're going to go about eventually putting it right. But it starts with the concept before we can start making plans and taking actions. It's probably necessary. Good evening, Nobby. How are you, buddy? Nice to see you. And Paul and Vaughan Malone. Hope I'm Celia. Hope I'm not missing anyone. Unfortunately, most people, although it's necessary, right, that people tackle the problems they see on the ground, especially in their own lives, actually in their own personal circumstances, their family or community circumstances, national circumstances, global circumstances, and even universal circumstances. We'll come to that. It's obviously important that we tackle them as these things happen. But at the same time, understanding how and why they've happened is almost as important. Because even as we tackle an issue, let's say the issue of mass immigration or the issue of homelessness, we're talking about Ireland in particular now, or the issue of corruption in politics and in the judiciary, for example, or of a completely mindless civil and public service, including the Gardaí, who are all just, as I say, driving the train to Auschwitz. I was just doing my job. Mindless toadies and lackeys. And I'm sorry to say, I know this is going to offend a lot of people who are in those professions, but we've been saying this for years now, guys. You may not have heard it before, but it's time to start thinking about whether or not what you're doing when you just follow orders is morally right or morally wrong. It doesn't matter really if it's legally right or wrong, because the law is a joke, especially in Ireland. It's a system of rules and regulations to serve the interests of the corrupted elites and keep the peasantry in its place. It's that simple, guys. And people who are in that profession, that what I'm saying is absolutely true. You know it. I know it, and you know it. And I've met enough of you now, lawyers, judges, senior guards, court service staff. I've met enough of you now in person and dealt with you in person to know that what you're doing, generally speaking, is shameful and disgraceful. But anyway, let's move on to that. I'll still shake your hand if I meet you in the street, provided you at least acknowledge that something has to change, But anyway, needs to be said, guys. So feel free to freeze these. I'll just put it up for a second to freeze this. And here, hold on, see if I can do it. Can I do it without me altogether in there? There we are. So you can freeze that and examine it, and we'll now pop back on to the next slide. I think we have a change of tone here. Yes. We're going to start with a small video clip, all right? Now, most of you will know that I wrote a book, which I haven't got on the table here with me, and I'm afraid, sorry, called Crisis, Cull or Coup, What, How and Who, Facts and Truths to Make You Think, with the flames of hell coming up on the front page. It was launched during the pandemic, and I used the phenomenon, what I call the COVID phenomenon, as an opportunity because a lot of people are going, hold on, something's not right. And I jumped on the opportunity after many, many frustrating years of trying to understand these things and explain these things as best I could. All of a sudden, where people before were just saying, oh, shut up, Stephen, you're taking life too seriously, or just listen, do as you're told, just get along. Why do you keep provoking these people, meaning corrupt judges, corrupt DPPs, officials and civil servants and all that? Why do you keep provoking them? You're asking for it and all this. And I was going, because you have to, because what they're doing is wrong. Someone has to do it, And we have seen how most of the people who have stood up and challenged the status quo and the corruption in the status quo have been targeted, vilified, cancelled, sacked, fired. In some cases, they've been done away with in very suspicious circumstances. You know, we're talking now about people who have made inventions like cars that run on water, for example, or hydrogen. Well, the oil companies couldn't have that, could they? Because it would put them out of business and they'd lose all their goodies and toys and wealth. So people like that just suddenly disappear without a trace. This, maybe one day we'll do a cover on that, because it's quite an interesting subject, frightening too, but interesting. But it's all about encouraging people to have the courage. You see, interestingly, if life is the way it should have been according to the original principle, we wouldn't actually need the type of courage that is unacceptably rare, actually, because things would be, you know, you don't need to be a hero soldier in a time of peace. You know what I mean? You do your training and you know, yes or no, sir, or whatever, and you keep fit and ready. But there's no need to be a hero. There's no opportunities for heroism if there's no battle to be fought. But we are in a battle, guys. And it's an interesting development that those of us who acknowledge we are far from perfect, we're imperfect in many, many ways, have to develop certain specialist skills which we wouldn't need if we were aligned with the original principle. We wouldn't need them. You know, you only need to learn how to fight if there's an enemy. You know, if there's no enemy, you don't need to learn that stuff. So these are skills that we have to develop in order to combat the wickedness, the evil, and the corruption in the world. But even as I use these words, and I hope we have time to get to this, the relative slide, to talk about the battle between good and evil is a misnomer, because good, if you like, cannot ultimately win. There might have to be incremental battles on the way, but ultimately good and truth and all that and the original principle cannot win by engaging in deliberately destructive, you know, by destructive, I mean sort of bloodthirsty, destructive tactics to the opposition. This is an interesting thing, because if we just keep wheeling out the guillotine every time we get sick and tired of the ruling classes, we'll just keep repeating the same cycles over and over again, guys. The new guys in will cause the same problems. It's the structures themselves that are the problem, the autocratic structures, which I argue are based on a diabolical and not a godly model. But anyway, excuse me. So we're going to listen now. Let's see what this guy, first of all, who is this guy and why am I putting this up here? Okay, this man is called Stanley Plodkin, I believe his name is Stanley Plodkin, known as the godfather of vaccines. All right. And he was being questioned in the US Senate, I believe, or in front of some committee. And it's just astonishing what he says, you know. Now, in the event, well, anyway, we'll see the slide afterwards. You know, he's not the only one. Most of the medical field does this. There's $1 trillion business. We need stricter laws and more people reporting them. They have made millions of people die and keep them sick around the world. So that's a comment there by Mary. Unethical. I mean, ethics. What is ethics, guys? Before we even listen to this, what is ethics? Okay. The professions are governed by two main things. One is their expertise in a particular field, and the second is their professional ethics, their standards. Now, if you lose your ethical standards, arguably you're not a professional anymore. This is what's going on, guys. What we're seeing is the mass abandonment of ethical and moral standards by the so-called professions in order to make coin, you know, to make money, to get more powerful. And she's right. This is $1 trillion business, keeping people sick so that they're dependent on big pharma. So let's hear what he has to say, guys. He starts by, the question is being asked, you might miss just the first question. It's like, did you experiment on orphans without them knowing what was happening? Did you experiment on orphans? So we're going to add it to the stage and just listen. It's only about a minute long, guys.
Orphans to study an experimental vaccine?
Yes.
Have you ever used the mentally handicapped to study an experimental vaccine?
I don't recollect ever doing studies in mentally handicapped individuals.
Now, I've interrupted here ever so briefly, guys, because he hums and haws for, just bear with it, guys. It only goes on for a few seconds. Ultimately, he says, Yeah, it's possible because it was commonplace at the time, but I sort of don't really remember. Now, whether he's actually telling the truth on this question, he appears to be telling the truth on the other questions. I suppose we should applaud him for his ethics in telling the truth to this committee. But anyway, bear with the guys. It's not very long, but just listen to the different questions that he answers yes to.
At the time, in the 1960s, it was not an uncommon practice.
So, you're saying, I'm not clear on your answer. I'm sorry. Have you ever used the mentally handicapped to study an experimental vaccine?
What I'm saying is I don't recall specifically having done that, but that in the 1960s, it was not unusual to do that, and I wouldn't deny that I may have done so.
Okay.
His hand will come down now, covering the mouth, another gesture.
Have you ever used babies of mothers in prison to study an experimental vaccine?
Yes.
He moves his hand.
Have you ever used individuals under colonial rule to study an experimental vaccine?
Yes.
Did you do so in the Belgian Congo?
Yes.
Did that experiment involve almost 1 million people?
Well, all right. Yes. Okay.
Right. So the point I'm trying to make, my friends, and I'm interspersed every week. There's usually something to do with the ethics of the medical profession, the scientific community, the so-called pandemic. You know, the amount of people that are, well, just simply, guys, the amount of people that are dying that took the jab. And they're trying to mask all this with notions like long COVID. And, you know, again, another day, maybe we'll do a little bit more detailed study into this. But it's to remind people that these people are at the very top of their professions. They are supposed to be the examples of professionalism, morality, ethics, service to the public, do no harm, you know, the Hippocratic Oath and all that sort of stuff. And there you have them admitting on camera that they used experimental vaccines. Just why? Not convenient. Why bother with guinea pigs when you can use real humans? Yeah. Guinea pigs don't complain, nor do humans who don't know that they're being experimented upon. Yeah. Orphans, you know, unwanted babies. Yeah. People in homes, nursing homes, probably prisoners as well. Probably. And we even know that experiments were done wholesale in America on unwitting populations. You know, they were being sprayed with various chemicals and entities to see what the effect might be. You know, this is the American military in this so-called scientific community. I hope we're all waking up to this, guys. So anyway, on to the next slide. So, I have to add it to the stage. So this is Stanley Allen Plodkin, okay? Quite an old man. That's part of his resume, guys. All I've done is just the little red lines. We don't need to spend time on this. This is where he's been working. Now, this links into last week where I said why they come after the children first. So he's professor of pediatrics, working in children's hospitals all over the place. All children, pediatrics. That's all. I just wanted you to realize vulnerable people, that's who they come after. Right, so now we're moving into, excuse me, we're moving into the Misha Era Festival. We were going to play another video. I won't do it today, guys, partly because I forgot to transfer it across into the other file. I could get it, but it'll waste too much time. So this happened just over a week ago. I was going to talk about it last week. The point I'm trying to make is that this is a cultural event. Now, I listened into several of the talks and I was very impressed by the quality of the speakers. John Walters, Terry McMahon, Eddie Hobbs. There's quite a few there now. Suzanne Delaney, and excuse me if I don't mention them all. There's a detective from the UK as well who talked about, which tied in with last week's theme, the industrialized pedophilia in England, in the UK, and how and why the powers that be are actively suppressing it and covering it up. Okay, it's very, very scary, guys. It's very, very scary. There was a time in my sort of semi-public career, so to speak, once people started noticing me, we were doing things online from about 2012. And there were a couple of questions I would always avoid dealing with, partly because I hadn't really got my head around them completely. One of them was the abortion issue. I'm very clear on that now. Treating human life like that is abhorrent, and there has to be a better way. That's simply put. Another one was this issue of pedophilia and the accusations and allegations that many senior people in senior positions of power and authority were involved in these secretive, clandestine. I just thought it was all a bit far-fetched, to be honest with you. But the more I thought about it and the more I've explored this and looked into it, the more plausible it is. But according to this detective from England, retired detective, who also got sort of cancelled and targeted and everything, according to him, it's not just exclusive to the so-called ruling classes, although personally I believe it would probably be more of a thing there, partly because it can be used to blackmail and control authority figures, But according to him, it's also in the working class, the middle class and everything. And it's a serious, serious problem, because I suppose you'd call the rape gangs, the Pakistani rape gangs in the UK, would be, I suppose, working class, would they not? Yeah. But even at that level, it's being covered up by those in the police and in the court prosecution service and at the ministry, or whatever it's called, the Ministry for Justice over there. Partly because of woke notions of racism and convoluted and frankly perverse notions of what does and does not constitute the sexual abuse of a minor, and then there's the embarrassment, because once these people are locked into their careers, the people in power and authority, that's where this whole, I'm just driving the train to Auschwitz theory comes from, They're being asked on a daily basis, are you going to follow your conscience, which might mean jeopardizing your career, your income, your promotion, or do you just do as you're told and brush it aside and hope to God that St. Peter's not keeping a log? Yeah, sort of thing. All right. So I just wanted to make this important. So when the next Misha Era festival comes up, whenever, I hope it does, I'd encourage people to go there. There was at least 500 people at it. One little point that might be worth noting. Now, I haven't seen it come up online, but apparently at one point somebody shouted out from the back, an unidentified somebody shouted out from the back, "Oh, line them all up against the wall and shoot them," right? Now, apparently, as this person did so, somebody noticed two people standing at the bar just a few yards away, where they had a clear line of shot, holding cameras towards the person who shouted that out. And apparently they gave a thumbs up signal, before the three of them got up and left the auditorium. So if you do see any derogatory reels or anything of that nature, please let me know and we'll cover it again next week. Hello, Simon. Nice to see you, buddy. Mr. Irish too, and Ian Sermon. Yes, I know Ben Gilroy, Ian. There's very few. And yes, Simon Martin, hello there. Paul. There's very few people. Do I know Ben Gilroy asks, Ian? Yes, there's very few people in the pro-justice community that are prominent, that would be well known, that I wouldn't have met. Some I know better than others. I know Ben quite well. We've helped each other try and get out of prison, for example. That tends to form good friendship bonds. But we'd have, as long as Ben is doing his best to help people in distress, I'm 100% for him. But, we'd have different approaches to what we do. I consider myself, first and foremost, I suppose, an educator. I hope so. And I keep trying to up my own understanding of things so I can share it. Ben might be more described as an activist. Maybe he might think of himself as a politician even, because he, but anyway, that's not for me to say. But anyway, that question aside, watching the time here, we're halfway through. So this brings us on to the topic of culture. Now, I hope I can do this, guys, in a reasonably swift manner. Let's see. So now, some of these slides I put together, guys, just to get us to think, what is culture? What does it mean? As a matter of fact, maybe I'd be better off going to the following slide to get a definition. Yes, I'll pull this up first, guys, and we'll go back to the other one then. All right. So don't worry about the good or evil thing just yet. But just in the box there, it says, culture is a concept that encompasses the social behavior, institutions, and norms found in human societies, as well as the knowledge, beliefs, arts, laws, customs, capabilities, attitudes, language, and habits of the individuals in these groups. Culture often originates from or is attributed to a specific region or location. But what most people have never asked or considered is, could my culture or aspects of it possibly be less than wholesome, less than good? We're going to have a look at that in a moment. So we'll pop back to the other guy just for a minute, guys. So in that context, I've used the term personal culture, meaning, how we live, the things and attitudes and elements of society that shape our thinking, our habits, our acting, what we like about, I like about Irish culture, the music, the sports, the crack, some things I don't like, the politics, the devious shenanigans that go on behind the scenes, various, there's some aspects we don't like and we shouldn't like, but we'll have a look at those in a minute. So here we go. Let's just have a quick look at this. So first of all, just getting to people just to think about this. It's more an exercise than just sharing here. Okay, so first of all, there's personal culture, which is your own personality and behavior. So you carry sort of a mini culture around with you, which people would describe as your personality or your character, right? Okay, which is obviously linked into the others. Then you have a family culture, which is usually the childhood environment. And there we have the family, the atomic family, the man, the woman, bounded by agape love, good love, right? Okay. Thirdly, then you have a community culture, which is equivalent to a sort of a social education. And there I've just put in, church, school, justice, and the harp to represent, music and the arts and so on. So whatever might be there, sport could be in there as well, of course. But the community culture, this helps shape us growing up, okay, to become who we are. Then there is national and ethnic culture, which is, in Ireland here, the source of patriotism. So we can take actions based on our sense of patriotism, which is linked in to the national or ethnic culture. And interestingly, on this subject, there are certain aspects of Irish culture. Let's say, for example, the fact that we allow the most ambitious and greedy and sociopathic people to become the politicians, who then make decisions that are anti-patriotic, or even treasonous, one could say. That's enough for a genuine patriot to want to leave and leave the culture, things like that. And we should be aware of this. Then next we have the global culture. And I'm suggesting that if you can move yourself objectively, because personal culture obviously is very subjective. So is family culture. It's very subjective. It's very local to me. Community is getting a little bit more objective, but compared to global, it's not quite as objective. So I say, if you can start thinking from a perspective of a global culture, now that doesn't mean that we should all be the same or anything like that. But if you can start thinking like that, I say that equals the source of bigger picture thinking. And finally, there's the universal culture, which I argue is reflected in that original principle, top right, which equates to, audacious though it sounds, thinking like God. And arguably, again, you say, what? Who does this Manning guy think he is? Well, I should throw in there, I did a few years in seminary and a bit of time as a minister in Alaska and all that, but I'm joking, really, of course. Audacious though it is, why not try it sometimes? Picture yourself in whatever environment you think the deity habituates, lives, or exists, looking down at humanity, looking down at this Stephen Manning guy and saying, right, this Stephen Manning guy is in this situation or that situation now. What would I like him to do? And sometimes if you think like that, it's a breakthrough. You think, oh, goodness gracious. Yeah, in my circumstances at this moment and given the resources around me or the environment I'm in or whatever, what's the best course of action? It's quite an interesting exercise, guys. I hope you agree. All right, let's pop to the next one again, the one we just looked at a moment. So again, culture, what really is it? Good or evil aspects of culture, which is which, what to be proud of, how do we decide? And if you remember at the beginning, I said that evil is an attack on good, all right? So now, arguably, because since the proverbial fall, we've all been wandering, somewhat lost and estranged from the divine, okay? That's what the whole notion of the fall was. Adam and Eve as the masculine and feminine entities, the blue and the red, right? They're moved away from the divine, and instead, unfortunately, they're being influenced by the absence of light, which is represented by black. That's where we get the black and red for the dark masculine, the satanic masculine. So from that time, history began. Like I said, Cain set up the first city in Enoch, set up weights and measures, taxation systems, all the stuff that we take for granted today. But look who it came from, all right? And then you ask yourself, oh, was there any taxation system in the Garden of Eden? No. Were there any laws? No, except just obey God, yeah. Was there any religion? Very interesting one, that, guys. No, there wasn't any of that either. Starts getting you thinking, does it not? Yeah. To understand here, so all again, I'm asking you to just consider, knowing that if we can identify an aspect of our culture that is definitively evil, let's say, for example, the great lie, whereby, for example, international law requires that judges be apolitical, meaning non-political, okay? So it's against international law and ethical and moral standards for politicians to be anointing judges, or in fact, senior ranking Gardaí, which they do. So, but the lie is foisted on the world stage. Oh no, Ireland is a democratic republic that operates under the rule of law. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. So that level of systematic lying and deception, which runs all the way through the so-called lifeblood of the civil service and the public service in Ireland, that's an aspect of the culture we could do without, okay? Because it lies, refer to the master of lies, and you're drifting up the sociopathic scale there, guys. And all right, so here we have. So what are we talking about? We should be looking at what? Attitudes, assumptions, beliefs, and history. Now, we're talking context of Ireland here today, okay? What are our general attitudes and assumptions, our beliefs, and the history of that we know about Ireland, What are the laws? What are the ethics? What is our religion? What is our education system like? What are we being taught? What about our language, the sport, the music, the dance, the arts and entertainment? Most of that now, of course, arguably falls into the good side of the category. There's nothing intrinsically evil about those, And then finally, the institutions, which I am arguing in many, many cases operate along diabolical principles, governance, social health and welfare, the health and welfare systems, financial, the banks in particular, political parties, and corporate big business. These are all institutions which I argue, because of their very size and structure, the way they have to operate, they have to integrate with other systems, other global systems, and that moves them into the diabolical sphere, I'm afraid. I've left the money there, and the man on the right there, he's dressed for war, just so we know. On the left, we've got sort of church and music. It's just to get you thinking. And let's see where this takes us now. All right, this is one you saw last week and possibly the week before. So the question is, particularly in relation to things like governance, corporations, big business, social institutions that are autocratic, where they have a boss or the government at the top telling the bureaucrats and administrators what they want to do, and it affects the employees, the consumers, the customers, the public at the bottom, okay? Now, again, to make this clear, guys, most of these diabolical institutions are doing something different to what they advertise, All right. So we are told that these institutions are there to serve the public, right? That's the first great lie. No, they're not. Okay. These institutions already know. Now, they may have had noble origins and beginnings, but it doesn't take long before an organization or institution gets to the size where you need to appoint some sort of governing entity. The problem with that is that now the individuals at the lower ends of the pyramid no longer have the luxury of operating according to their own conscience. They've agreed to defer their ethics, their morality to the instructions from above. And once that sort of thing happens, and once you realize that the most amount of sociopaths and psychopaths are collected at the top of these institutions, then you realize, the ethos has changed from whatever originally was. It's now about serving them and serving the system, right? Once again, freeze this and have a look at it, guys, if you wish. We'll keep going. Right, now here's a relatively new slide. You may, if you've seen previous slides like this, guys, you remember me talking about the empaths and the sociopaths, all right, two ends of the scale. Empaths care about people, sociopaths do not, okay? It's as simple as that. And in place of love, where we have the little golden heart there, usually it's substituted for money and power and position and prestige and all the things like that, okay? So again, when we're looking at our culture, creating, remaking, and or destroying culture, where culture equals what? Social environment and living and our living circumstances. So again, we may cover this in a bit more depth on another occasion, but just if you look here, so the empathetic type of people will produce this column underneath the original principle symbol, love and kindness, quality relationships, creativity for joy, beauty and inspiration, altruistic ethos, living for others, open and honest, contributory and constructive, and they're there to empower and to genuinely educate others. All right, that's generally speaking. Now, the opposite traits over here on the right, okay, the sociopaths, when they're in positions of power and authority in our culture, they're there for power and control, versus over on the left there, the love and kindness. You can compare them for yourself, guys. Quantity relationships versus quality. It's all about the spondoonies. Productivity for profit. Soulless utility. And again, we were talking about this the other day. Think about the lamp streets, the lampposts around your area today. How much creativity has gone into them? They're just sticks with lights on the end of them. Think of the old time when they were all wrought iron and with, motifs and cherubs and stuff hanging off them. It was there to delight as well as to be functional. That's gone missing. Soulless utility. So egocentric ethos, selfish and callous, secretive and deceitful, parasitic and predatory, and suppressive and indoctrinative, if that's a proper word. And again, we could talk about this this could be a slide for a whole hour on its own, okay? But instead, I'll just read what we've got at the bottom there, guys, make it a bit bigger so I can read it properly. There is a direct, observable link between 1, empathetic or sociopathic personality traits, 2, one's chosen profession, career, or job, and 3, the consequent positive or negative effects on the culture. Positive or negative in this context can equate quite literally to good or evil. A culture can therefore be described as definitively, albeit relatively and incrementally, more or less good and or evil, inasmuch and to whatever extent its empathetic or sociopathic traits predominate. Bit of a mouthful there, guys. Hope you get it. I'm pointing out the fact that where we have sociopaths and psychopaths in control and in charge, you're going to get a culture that reflects their diabolical traits, which we've seen around us, have we not? This is a common slide. Most of you will have seen this before. I'll only spend a minute on it. This is the chart that explains, the question would be, where would I be on that chart? Now, hopefully I'm an empath, so I'd be over here on the blue side versus a sociopath or psychopath. And how well educated am I? And how much am I prepared to do something? Am I willing to be active? And if so, I go higher up that column on the left, okay? Similarly, on the right, sociopaths and psychopaths who don't care about people. The stupid ones, the ones at the bottom right, most of them are in jail. The clever ones, most at the top, are the CEOs of international corporations and lawyers, judges, and other similar professions. Trouble is, that's just a model. This is actually how the world is at the moment, guys. It's been developing like this in particular since about the 1960s. And what's happened is, as you can see at the top, and I'll make it a bit bigger for you, as you can see at the top, the actively evil people, top right, have taken control of global institutions, capitalism, communism, the banks, nation states, media, education, health, justice and law, energy, food, science, and the so-called professions. And there's an increasing number of people now since the shock of the scamdemic, who are drifting more and more towards the blue end of the scale here, and willing to get involved in fighting back, but without the bloodlust, so to speak. All right. So again, freeze that if you wish, guys, and have a look at it. How are we doing for time? Oh yeah, we might just do it. So what does my culture celebrate? And there's a little bit gone missing off the bottom. My mistake, guys. I'll correct that for the next time we look at this, but there's enough here to talk about. So what values? And interestingly, I've found these blue and red icons, for good and evil. And again, to make the point, it's not a battle in the sense that we're going to go in and chop them all up and cut their heads off and throw them into fire and all that sort of stuff. No. We've got to find a way of defeating evil without becoming evil. That's the real difficult conundrum. I've got a few ideas about how this is going to happen, but it begins with understanding what evil is and making a decision not to partake in it, not to fund it, not to vote for it, not to marry it, not to go into business with it, in as much as that is humanly possible, because we're all stuck in this world, this fallen world, unfortunately, which is dominated by these evil entities. So we'll just do a comparison from left to right. So what does my culture celebrate? The values, right? Respect for human life versus, we're going over to the right here, abortion and assisted dying. Values. The quest for truth versus engineered deceptions. Individual and collective freedoms versus restrictions and control. True education, which is enlightening the individual, versus training and indoctrination. Aesthetic creativity versus profitable functionality. Good natural health versus the sickness industry. Protection of children versus the corruption of children. Respect for nature versus the exploitation of nature. And I don't mean using the resources, I mean abusing them, Peace and unity versus war and division, which is very profitable for the psychopaths, career psychopaths. Sufficiency versus poverty. Equity and fairness versus selective elitism. Natural justice versus system-serving law. Direct collaborative democracy versus autocratic political hierarchies. And local self-sufficiency versus global dominance of supply, as we see is going on, which equals, on the left, the values equals the original principle, top right, spirit, mind, body, concept, plan, action, deity, feminine, masculine, in that order. And over on the right, the satanic Cain mindset, the vices equivalent to the masculine over the feminine, with the absent divine equals this satanic Cain mindset. I hope it's all making sense, guys. We'll keep pumping on. I'm not sure exactly how many more we've got. Oh, this was worth a mention, guys, 10 minutes out. If you haven't seen this, guys, that's the flag of Albania, probably the worst, symbolically speaking, one of the worst flags in the world. But it doesn't really have a bearing because they weren't big players on the world stage in any of the major events in the last major world wars and stuff like that. So, but I've just stuck it there so you know what we're talking about. Albania, east of Greece, northwest of Greece, east of Italy, up there, right? I remember at one time going there when I was younger. No, did I go there or did I not? No, I didn't actually go there. But apparently, anybody who came in looking like a hippie got sat down in the airport and was given a haircut. So predominantly a Muslim country. What they've done, believe it or not, they've actually developed an AI system that they're called Diela, and they've made it a minister of state. Now, this is interesting because, again, talking about cultures, what effect will this have on our cultures? Because I know a couple of activists that have already gone in with affidavits into the courts that were prepared by artificial intelligence, and the judges have wanted to throw them out. But it absolutely, I mean, you think about it, if AI is programmed properly and is fed all the laws of the land, it should be relatively easy, certainly in a legal setting, to refer to artificial intelligence instead of spending years, months of your life negotiating with lawyers and solicitors and barristers who each have a vested interest in ripping you off and delaying your case. This is sort of what we were doing to a certain extent with the Integrity Ireland project. We were trying to simplify the way that laws are interpreted and everything in Ireland by, basically ambushing the government with questions they didn't answer. And when they didn't answer them, we said, okay, we'll answer it then. You failed to answer. Silence implies consent. Here is the answer. And we were trying to help people by preparing them before they went into court with documents and understandings of what was going on. Similar to sort of saying, oh, well, I've asked AI, are you going to argue with AI? AI has been programmed with all of your laws. So what are you arguing about? Because it will take away an awful lot of the deceit and deception and delays of the Irish so-called legal system if we had something like this here. Let's see the headings. Apparently she's giving, now I can't picture how this is going to work, but apparently this virtual minister is going to give birth to 83 AI offspring, which are each going to be assigned a role as assistants to the current politicians in Albania. Now, I would argue the next logical step is to get rid of the flipping politicians altogether, and let's just, because in technical matters, now this, what I'm talking about now, guys, is matters that do not, matters that you can be indoctrinated and trained in. So, for example, if you're going to be a car mechanic, all right, you don't need to understand the philosophy of car mechanics. You just need to understand the mechanics and the physics of car mechanics. And that can be trained into you or indoctrinated. In other words, there's only one correct way to replace this part or to change that wheel. So me just telling you what it is, we're not having a discussion or a debate about it, because there's 150 wrong ways to do it that'll cause an accident. There's one right way to do it. So you can indoctrinate someone in that. The same as with surgeons in hospitals, being a mechanic of the body, basically. So there are certain, let's say, occupations that, and being a judge would be another one. All right. Now, judges are given a little bit of leeway to apply their wisdom and their compassion and their integrity. The problem in Ireland being that most of our judges don't have any wisdom or any compassion or any integrity. So you might as well just get rid of the bloody lot of them, because you could indoctrinate a judge. If a judge's only function is to correctly interpret the law and make a well-informed, rational decision on what penalties or punishment to apply, well, in my way of thinking, AI could do it. I'm aware of all of the problems and potential problems with AI interfering in our lives. That aside, it's like all things, like guns, put them in the wrong hands, they're very dangerous. Put them in the right hands, and sometimes they're absolutely necessary. And what was this third slide? How are we doing, guys? We're getting there. Same sort of thing, guys. Corruption-free AI-generated minister. I think it's a novel idea. It certainly caught my attention. I'd be interested to hear people's comments about the dangers. But it's all to do with what's programmed into it. But something like the law, in my opinion, makes common sense. Put the law into this thing, and we could, instead of going into court per se with all the pomp and circumstance and what's it called? Pomp and circumstance, you know what I mean? Pageantry, instead of all of that, you could literally just write out the dispute, put it in your affidavits, and forward it up. You wouldn't even have to attend in person, just forward it to some sort of AI entity that can come back with it. This is what we were doing with Integrity Ireland and also with the People's Tribunal of Ireland. This is sort of what we were doing. We were researching the laws and coming up with the only logical answer that would fit the circumstances. They had to be simple questions, though. The difference with AI, they'll be able to deal with complex questions, won't they? Yeah. So what were my next couple of slides? We're almost there. Oh, yeah, the great lie. I pop this in most days. This is out of the middle of the Crisis Color Coup book. There it is. The great lie, the first part on it is that governments work for the people. Let's see if I can see a couple more of them. Maybe I can start covering one or two of these. Oh yeah, that all people are equal under the law. It's a joke. That public servants serve the public. It's a lie. That democracy replaced tyranny. All of these are lies, guys. And there's a whole list of them in the Crisis Color Coup book, which I use to explain this, as well as the truth about the COVID-19 phenomenon. Okay, even people who succumbed and followed all the instructions, it's still not too late for you guys to understand what really happened. There are things you can do to counterbalance the wrongs done to you. But first of all, we have to understand and concede, or not concede, but acknowledge that this was one of the worst evils ever visited on humanity. Right. Yes. Oh, we are actually nearly finished, guys, which is interesting for me. Great. I pop this in every week as well. Our rights come from God, not government. That's a model of government on the right. The model of God is the original principle where, as a man, you know, my most masculine aspect is my physical strength compared to a feminine, right? Compared to a woman, at least if she's not an East German shot butter. Okay. So my most masculine aspect is my strength. My feminine aspect is my compassion and wisdom, okay, which resides in our minds, basically, okay? You know, body, mind, do you remember? Spirit, mind, body. And what's the spirit? The spirit is our connection to the divine, okay? That's where our authority comes from. Unfortunately, most of us have been disconnected from it for so long, including our ancestors, that we've started to take the the status quo, the state of human society today, human history. We've just taken it for granted. Well, that's always going to be like that, isn't it? No, it's not, guys. Because if we allow them to continue doing what they're doing now, there will be no opportunity for us to return to source, because they are trying to make themselves gods in their own image, or actually more accurately, in the image of Lucifer. Which is, it's another truism, all right? They've elevated Lucifer to the position of the deity. God is some sort of malevolent bully, and they've switched sides. And now they've decided, as Lucifer's representatives, they're entitled to act like gods. Hence the 15-minute cities, the shutting down of all these bank accounts. Vietnam shut down, was 83 million bank accounts because people didn't want to sign up for digital IDs. Overreach, diabolical overreach, guys. There's nothing humane, there's nothing enlightened, there's nothing godly about these activities. And finally, this slide, this is just for those of you who may be interested in pooching around and seeing where else we have materials, and hi Shady. Would I agree that government means mind control? More or less, yes. The original, I've only got less than a minute to finish this off, guys. The more, it seems like a utopian concept and a bit far-fetched, but it starts with the idea, my friends, all right? It starts with the idea. The concept, then the plan, then the action. Most of us have never understood how it was originally meant to be. Hopefully, I'm starting to bring that into the general consciousness. With that, my friends, I'll say good night. Thank you very much. Sorry, Jennifer, I'll address your comment when I can. God bless everyone. Thank you for your support, and hopefully see you again next Sunday at 7.